Last week in episode 122, I gave you the framework, the two phases every goat herd goes through, and the three strategies for building toward what you actually want. Today is the story behind why that framework matters. The show goat era, the Montana doe kids that survived a brutal winter, and the contrast that finally made everything clear. And I'll also tell you what our replacement criteria look like today, because that might help you set your replacement criteria and help you reach your herd goals faster. Let's get to it. Hey there, welcome to GoatWise. I'm Millie Bradshaw, animal scientist and rancher. Here we talk meat goats, feeding strategies, goat fencing, and livestock management that holds up in real life. If you care about raising goats well and building systems that actually work, you're in the right place. Let's talk livestock. If this podcast has been helpful, go leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Scroll down to ratings and reviews, tap the stars, and leave a few sentences. It helps more serious livestock producers find the show, and I read every one of them. Then go grab the free kidding due date chart at goatwise.com/kidding-chart. That also gets you on the insider email list. Link is in the show notes. Here's what's been happening on the ranch. We were at County Fair last week, which was a great week overall. There was a lot of rain and mud on Thursday. I'm not complaining about rain, but the timing was challenging. Lots of highlights from the livestock show, and I'll put the details and some photos in Friday's newsletter. But one of the most exciting moments was Ray and Darcy going Grand and Reserve Champion Senior Hog Showman. It was Ray's last year in 4-H, and he's always been showing a little bit in Sage's shadow, so that was an extra special moment for him. I'm proud of all the kids, the way they showed their animals and the sportsmanship they brought all week. It was a good week. On the virtual fence front, before we left for fair, the goat kids had gotten way too comfortable in the new pasture and were traveling much further from the does than we were okay with. So, to avoid a big problem while we were gone, we penned them and set out a few hay bales, which bought us a little time to think through the best way to handle it. The short version is we ended up weaning the kids on Sunday, a little earlier than we'd normally do it. They've grown really well this year, and I think they were ready enough. Sometimes you just have to try something and see what happens. We took the does right back out to pasture on virtual fence once we had the kids sorted off. The predator pressure is pretty high right now. Coyotes are weaning their pups, and they are loud and close in every direction. The livestock guardian dogs were active all night and well into the morning, and we spotted a coyote just 100 yards from the night trap while we were moving goats around. I hope the dogs are up for it. I think they are. I'm glad to be getting back to our normal routine this week. All right, last week was the framework. This week is the story behind it. And if you haven't heard episode 122 yet, go back and listen. But this episode stands on its own. You don't need the framework to get value from the story, and you don't need the story to use the framework. They're better together, but either one works. We started with show goats. Everybody who's been listening for a while knows that. The show goats taught us a lot. They are a high-speed education in everything that can go wrong with goats. If you can keep show goats alive and productive, you can keep anything alive and productive. That's only a small exaggeration. What we had during those show goat years was a comparison. Because we were raising both show goats and commercial meat goats, we'd be kidding show goats in January, which is a terrible time to kid here. And then we had our commercial goats kidding in June, getting a little easier every year because we were culling hard and being very particular. And the gap between those two herds just kept getting wider. The show goats were improving, but show goat genetics are expensive and the gene pool you have access to is limited. The commercial herd was improving leaps and bounds. And once we got the Spanish goats in, the gap, in terms of both labor and profit, was so large that it just became obvious. My heart was in the commercial herd. I just didn't know it until I was doing it. We hit a point where we either had to invest significantly more money in the show goats to take them the direction they needed to go, or we needed to let them go. It was a hard decision when we got there, but it was very clear. Now let me tell you about Smoke Ridge goats. In 2022, we bought 40 doe kids from Yvonne and Craig at Smoke Ridge Goats in Montana. They had been developing, and I'll say perfecting, that herd for 30 years. And when I was first talking to Yvonne about buying, my reaction was, I can't pay that much for doe kids. That's a lot of money. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that their philosophy about raising goats lined up completely with how I thought about raising commercial cattle. And that was a big deal. Seeing someone raise goats the way a successful commercial cattle producer would approach it, that was impressive and not common. When Yvonne described how her goats behaved, I didn't disbelieve her exactly, but I thought, this sounds a little inflated. I've never seen goats behave the way she's describing. So I bought 40 doe kids and I waited. They got here and they jumped off the trailer, and I thought, oh my gosh, they're tiny. They were so small. That was October. Now I know they weren't really that small. They just looked small compared to the oversized boars I was used to. And then we had a terrible winter. We were in the middle of construction. The barn was framed, and then on the day the metal for the roof and siding was delivered at the beginning of November, it started to snow, and it just kept snowing. I don't know the total snowfall that winter, but I'd guess somewhere between 4 and 6 feet. It didn't melt off until the middle of May. Obviously, we did not finish the barn. It was really hard, and those little doe kids had no shelter. They went through that entire winter without it. None of them died, no sickness, every single one of them survived. And looking back, I wish we hadn't even put a buck in with them that first year. We were putting unreasonable expectations on those animals that were just trying to stay alive in several feet of snow in a completely new environment. Very few of them bred up and kidded as yearlings, which Yvonne had been upfront about. She told me if doe kids breed up, great. If they don't, also great. Zero expectations. And after that year, we made the decision to stop breeding doe kids to kid as yearlings entirely. The workload wasn't worth it, the outcomes were often poor, and I believe it was affecting the long-term productivity and the longevity of those does. We had been considering that for a couple of years already. That winter decided it for us. But the doe kids not just surviving it, but thriving, that settled the question about whether I'd gotten what I paid for. I had. The contrast that made everything clear came the following year. That winter of 2022 into 2023, I had taken the show goats back to town to kid. We couldn't do January kidding without the barn and with that much snow. It would have been a disaster. The next year, 2024 kidding season, was our first kidding show goats off-grid. Our place in town had sold, no power out here, bitter cold, 20 below at times. We had a calf warmer running off a generator. It was a lot. Walking up to the barn every hour or two all night, in the dark, in the cold, for weeks. And then, a couple of months later, June, we started kidding the commercial herd. We tried to barn kid the Spanish does just like we'd barn kidded the commercial Bordeaux. They let us know they were having none of it, so we stopped mid-season. We just left them out to do what they were going to do, and they showed us they could do it. The contrast was extreme. Intensive, round-the-clock, cold weather kidding in January versus June, where the does were actively telling us we were stressing them out by putting them in the barn, and then going out and doing the whole thing themselves without us. I don't regret for 1 second the money I paid for those Spanish goats. What that contrast opened up was a different way of seeing what was possible. Barn kidding is not mandatory. Night checking is not mandatory. Moving away from prophylactic vaccines and antibiotics, not because we're against them, we're not, and we use them when they're necessary, but because the health of our animals is actually better without them in our current system. None of that was a possibility to me when we started. It required building the right herd first, and once we saw it was possible, we wanted to get there faster. It also opened my eyes to the bigger question. What else haven't we tried just because nobody around us does it that way? Pasture kidding wasn't even on my radar as an option. All the sheep people lamb in barns. All the goat people kid in barns. Until you see a different approach work, it's hard to even imagine it. Most people never see what's actually possible with goats, so they assume the hard way is the only way. Now you know it isn't. I should probably tell you before you look up Smoke Ridge and start calling them to get on their wait list, Yvonne and Craig sold their goats a couple years ago, shortly after we bought our does. I wish I had bought their whole herd. I still call and text them regularly to report in on how the does are doing here and to ask questions and discuss ideas for the future direction of our herd. They are a treasure trove of wisdom. Let's wrap this up with what our actual replacement criteria look like now, because having solid criteria holds you to your own standards even when your favorite doe has a beautiful kid that doesn't quite meet the replacement requirements. To be a replacement doe in our herd, or to be sold as a replacement doe, an animal has to meet all of these things. She has to have been born as a multiple. We do have a minor exception for first kid does. If we have a very nice single out of a first-time mom, she can be considered. Beyond that, multiples only. She has to have a 1x1 teat structure, one teat on either side placed well. We can't evaluate udder structure fully until she actually kids, so if a doe we raised up kids and her bag is split or divided, she gets culled, and we won't keep female offspring out of her. She has to have a correct bite, no overbite or underbite. She has to have been mothered. We do not keep bottle kids as replacements, not because of their quality, but because of our management system. Bottle kids don't do well behind electric netting. They want to be with people and they'll go through anything to get there. That said, bottle kids from operations like ours are actually a great way to get good genetics affordably. Very friendly, and they are usually the offspring of high-performing does with big litters. We do a visual appraisal at weaning. Hair coat, growth, overall condition, how healthy she looks. We're not keeping runts. We're not keeping animals that are struggling. We don't have many of those anymore, but we did in the beginning. And then behavioral culls, bad moms. Any doe that doesn't take her kids, get them cleaned up, suckling, and take care of them, she's gone. Bad udder once she kids, split, pendulous, blown teats, also gone. Fence jumpers and crawlers, gone. Mean animals, probably gone. We want protective goats, not dangerous ones. Our criteria will be different from yours, and that's how it should be. You might have a color standard. You might have a frame size preference. You get to decide what matters in your environment. Just decide those criteria, hold to it, and keep refining it as you learn what actually matters where you are. 2 rules to close with. Good bucks first. Always. That is half your genetics and your fastest improvement tool. And never keep a doe kid that isn't better than the average of your current herd. If you're always keeping above average, you're always moving in the right direction. Goats don't have to be so hard. That's the whole point. Build toward that. It's worth it. See you next week. Hey there. Thanks for listening today. If this episode was helpful, share it with another producer who's raising goats. And if you haven't already, leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more serious livestock owners find the show. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for veterinary advice. I'll see you next week here on GoatWise.